again, I mean, if you guys watched a couple hours ago with Dr. Esser, how inspirational he was, I've got another one for you. And I don't know if it's because these people are fasters or they did fasting. There's just something special about today's guests. And I'm going to let him introduce himself in case you're unfamiliar with him or his work, but he's amazing. And his name is Dr. Frank Sabatino. I had the pleasure of running the tech on a course he did called Lean for Life. And I learned so much from him. And I've visited him a couple of times now in Florida, and he's a wonderful doctor and a wonderful human. And we thank you so much for being here. Hello, Dr. Frank. How are you?
Hello, AJ. Hello, hello, hello. And hello to all the listeners and viewers. I want to thank you for participating with us. I know you're all hunkering down, and we're hoping that we could just connect a little bit at this time when we're just spending so much time distancing from each other. So I'm glad you guys can join us, and I'm really looking forward to it. I currently am the director of the Balance for Life Health Retreat in Deerfield Beach, Florida, which is a residential live-in plant exclusive retreat that also does water-only fasting. And that's a work that I've been doing for the last 40 to 45 years. It's been a big and passionate part of my life. And today, I know there's some of you out there that I know, maybe there's people that I haven't met yet, and I hope that we get to know each other a little bit more. But from my standpoint today, I was telling AJ, well, let me begin, because AJ was going to do an event at our place that got canceled with all of this. And I had a very special hug and a kiss for her birthday, because it was her birthday celebration. So I'm going to do it now. Here it is. And there it is. I had to get that one out. Okay. That's our starting point. And bottom line is, I want this to be more of an interactive thing if we can. I'm going to do a little bit of talking, and then we'll open it up and we'll go in a number of directions that I'd like to go. And I know at first we have to deal with the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room, of course, is what we're all dealing with right now in terms of the viral situation and what people are going through. And I want to take it away from some of the narrative that we've had with this, because the narrative has been this constant pandemic of fear and oppression, and the constant photographs of people dying in emergency rooms. And let me say straight out up front that I have the greatest empathy for the families and people that have gone through this, some that have been incredibly sick, some that have died, and also a great love and support for all the healthcare workers that have been working around the clock to help people in these circumstances. But what I have a problem with is that the narrative has really focused its attention away from some of the things that are incredibly important about the power that we all have to create conditions that allow us to really heal and function at a really high level. And this has gotten really completely separated from this narrative. So you get this impression that really there's nothing you can do as a human being, or there's very little that you can do. You're at the beck and whim of these conditions and situations. And they've kind of undersold what really is an unbelievable power that exists within each of us to heal. And I want to address that a little bit today, and kind of my intro. You know, we have a long history going back in the human population where at an earlier time in our history, we were really goaded into accepting the voices of authority outside of ourselves, which is really how kings and gurus and priests and all of these kinds of things were established. We looked to the outside for authority figures, for information. But as we became really truly thinking animals, we had this understanding, this ability to really think for ourselves. And I find it kind of interesting because the ongoing medical profession as it exists today is a natural extension of that very ancient mysticism where we constantly look outside of our own bodies, looking for that authority. I still find it interesting today that when someone is suffering with some pathology or some issue, how willing they are to turn away from the healing power within themselves to opt for some form of treatment and intervention that in many ways doesn't even come this close to what the power and wisdom of the body is itself. And we see this, of course, in the medical profession today. Right now, we're spending close to $3 trillion a year on a healthcare budget. And there's not one expert that doesn't really realize that of all that money spent, more than 75% of it is being spent on conditions that are completely fixed by routine lifestyle choice, not by making more medical care available, not by more medical interventions, not by the developments of big pharma or all kinds of drug treatments, but what we do on a routine and daily basis to help ourselves. And of course, the big things that we suffer with daily, routinely in this culture are things like heart disease and cancer and obesity and diabetes. And we now know that all of those issues, all of those problems are absolutely reversible, fixable by the routine lifestyle choices of eating plant-exclusive diets, moving more, handling stress better, creating healthier relationships, bringing the highest levels of ethics and moral codes into our lives with kindness, compassion, love. These are the things that support the incredible healing power of the body. And of course, we see it even in fast, where we have what I like to call the intelligent art of doing nothing. All you're doing is putting people in an unbelievable resting state, giving them water, and watching them heal from the most glaring, unbelievable pathologies. So from the get-go, I want to really emphasize that do not move past that idea of this incredible power that you have within yourself to heal. And I bring that up because currently, when we look at things like viruses or viral infection, we know that these things exist in the environment. And in the current state of affairs, just as a short story, because you've all been inundated with this time and time again by the talking heads that you've been exposed to. For example, we know that, and this is very important, basically all human viral infections come from animals outside of ourselves. I need to say this because the bottom line is, if we, and this is stemming from the idea of the crowded, despicable conditions in factory farms. It's the use of these wet markets in China where we're stacking animals of all kinds so that they're really drowning in each other's feces, urine, and blood, cutting these animals open, blasting and flash flooding our own faces and bodies with this excrement that's coming from these animals. And the truth of the matter is, we've known, for example, just 3 classic examples, from the SARS-CoV, the SARS coronavirus in early 2000, was another form of coronavirus. It was actually more lethal. There was more mortality related to it than the current SARS-CoV-2, which is another coronavirus feeding COVID-19, which is the current problem. In between that, there was MERS, which was another coronavirus. So we have 3 evidences of coronaviruses that have been linked with kind of epidemic-like situations. Interestingly enough, coronaviruses primarily are found in bats. And then what happens is these bats have to have an intermediate, and usually for SARS, it was the civet cat, for MERS, it was the camel, and for COVID-19, it was these wonderful little pangolins, these almost armadillo-like animals that are unbelievably trafficked. So the truth of the matter is, without relying on animal trafficking, without relying on animal food consumption, without relying on factory farming, we would not have these viruses entering the human population. Because what happens is they come from a bat to a pangolin, then they move into a human population. We call that zoonotic infection. It's coming from animal to man. Then they go through a process of mutation. And in the case of COVID, it has a way to attach to an enzyme and receptors in the lung. And that's why you see this, in certain cases, this devastating outcome of respiratory changes, where in a very susceptible population, people that are older, people that have certain morbid conditions like hypertension, heart disease, obesity, and diabetes, we see that they can progress very rapidly into a state where you get consolidation in the lung, filling the lungs up with fluid and jelly-like material that can cause respiratory arrest and death. We know that that can occur, but the bottom line is this all relies on this unbelievable dependence that we still have on animal food production, on utilizing animals in this brutal way and bringing them into these wet markets and bringing them into this factory farming. So I have to tell you right out of the blocks, we need to understand that how we process our food supply, what we're using, plays a major role for compromising our population, especially with viral infection. And I don't care how many drugs the pharmaceutical industry creates, and I don't care how many vaccines they produce. If we don't change that process, there's always going to be this communication, this translation of mutable viruses jumping from animals into the human population. And we're going to be battling this up and down over who knows how many years to come. And the other piece of this is you'll understand that in this process, they don't talk about, they kind of talk around it tangentially. And that is, we know that the people that are most at risk in dying are already people that are susceptible. So for example, we know if you have high blood pressure, you're 2 times more likely to have a more serious complication. If you have heart disease, you're 3 times more likely. But get this, if you're obese, you're 6 times more likely to have a serious complication that could end you up in a hospital or an ICU. And that's with a body mass index above 28. The average index in the United States is close to 30. So we have a population that is almost at a susceptible level to any viral infection just because of the obesity that they've created over time. And the interesting thing is, not only do we prevent viruses from getting into the human population by avoiding all of that animal contact and animal industry, but we also know that that plant-exclusive diet also eliminates all those susceptible conditions. It lowers blood pressure, it heals heart disease, it reduces obesity, it changes type 2 diabetes. So I really, because this was not really something ever present in this narrative, I needed to share that, to understand that when you really understand that health is built by healthful living, we have an organism that is capable in its immune system of handling viruses. We have a situation that can adapt to those changing conditions, but we need to create the conditions of health so it's operating at its highest level of function. And by eating and providing the biological requirements of plant-exclusive food, adequate rest, hydration, activity, sun exposure, sunlight, the vitamin D content of sunlight, all of these things are supportive of establishing a very profound and healthy immune system and immune response, and give us the greatest opportunity to not be susceptible. And what you will see is that mortality and morbidity, sickness and death will dramatically drop even in the face of viral infection, because the body has to adapt. And I just really have such a problem with the way this narrative has gone, because it's not giving the people, our population, the insight of how important those daily choices that they make really are. And I know we're in a frightening state right now because we're playing catch-up baseball in the middle of very infected people. And so don't get me wrong, all of these procedures of social distancing and sanitary procedures and using sanitizers and wearing masks to prevent droplets from spreading person to person, those have value. But I think we need to get underneath that and get to the foundation of health being built by healthful living and what you can do to keep yourself in a state of resilience and vitality and health in the face of whatever comes down the pike. And truthfully, the more we can separate from animal use, animal food, despicable, disgusting, deplorable factory farming, crowded conditions, and all of those wet markets where you're getting all of that kind of merging of blood and guts and semen and all of these kind of fluids between these animals, and then cross-fertilizing and jumping and mutating into the human population, there's a lot we can do in that kind of situation to really help ourselves. So I just wanted to start off with dealing with that little bit of elephant in the room. There's a lot of statistics out there. There's a lot of data that you've been inundated with. I just wanted to give that little bit of an overview without getting into a lot of data, but just understand that the comorbid conditions, especially obesity, heart disease, and all of that, are completely fixable and reversible by the kinds of information that AJ's been sharing over a long period of time and what I've been teaching and working with over a very long period of time.
Well,
So I wanted to start with that, and then let's go into whatever else.
well,
Anybody have any questions they want to start with?
absolutely. Well, first of all, amen. And thank you for talking about what nobody else is talking about, which is, you know, the true place that it came from to begin with. And that is the elephant in the room. And yeah, this is amazing. So I just want to first read Susan's comment, because she says, "Hi, Dr. Frank Sabatino. I'm watching you from the True North Health Center. Thank you for being the inspiration to my going vegan in 2007 after a 2-week stay at your former health center, the Regency Health Spa. I now live a whole food plant-based style that's gluten and SOS free, but it took 12 years after going vegan to do that. Now I'm at a healthy weight and normal BMI. You are a very smart man. Love your energy."
Oh, thank you very much. And say hello to my good friend, Dr. Alan Goldhammer, please.
Yeah, absolutely. You're just you're a kinder, gentler version, kind of, because you both have. I love you both, and you both have absolutely extraordinary information. So this speed is going a little bit fast. So let me get to the first question. It was something about the high doses of vitamin C kill the virus.
Well, this is the thing. A lot of people are trying to shy away from this because what happens when you get these ideas of like high vitamin C, zinc, and so on, you get these isolated pieces. The truth of the matter is there are results that are showing where some of these things may help in terms of viral infection. Remember, when a virus is basically not a living thing, the only way that it can produce itself is by getting incorporated into our own gene pool. So when a virus comes in, it attaches to a cell. So that's the attachment phase. Then it has to invade, then it has to incorporate into the genetic material of the host, and then it has to be replicated. And so what happens is there are data that suggests that high C may somehow modify that process. But as a scientist, I have to tell you, there has to be more legitimate evaluation, more randomized looks and studies in the face of these viral conditions to really make that jump. And I don't want to just get out there and say, everybody go out and take high doses of C, because in my opinion, it's never one thing that's going to change this process. You notice I opened this up by talking about the biological requirements. So for example, let's suppose you did high C, but you're not getting adequate rest. And let's suppose you're not getting fresh air, or let's suppose you're not eating a healthy diet and it's still loaded with animal foods, refined foods, and the like. It's not going to do much. So the bottom line is, it's very hard when we talk about susceptibility and isolated components. So I tend to shy away from that. Now, if it was me and I was dealing at a very end stage with this process, would I try a high vitamin C drip? There's a chance I would try it. I mean, have to be honest with you. But the bottom line is, I don't see where the science is that absolutely unequivocal about any one isolated nutrient. But vitamin C is a very important nutrient. And by the way, it is unbelievably abundant in the diet that we're recommending, and all of the fruits, vegetables, and things we see. And perhaps some additional, we also know zinc, that may come up too, is another one of those things that has value. We know vitamin D from sunlight has value. And if the question comes up, I'll talk about the direct effects of vitamin D on the immune system. They're really pretty profound. And so, again, just to answer the C question, I wouldn't jump the bandwagon of just going out and loading up on high C, but I would look at my overall complete lifestyle and see where those gaps are that I can really build in adequate, better sleep and rest, a little bit more physical activity. Look at all of those pieces. Don't just isolate to one factor.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Peggy asks, are you SOS free? And do you work with type 1 diabetics that are SOS free, but that cannot lower their blood glucose numbers under 130?
The first part is yes, I am SOS free. And the truth is, there are a number of type 1 diabetics who do unbelievably well with SOS. So I don't know what the missing link is for you. I'd have to look at that. AJ and I know the people from Mastering Diabetes. They're type 1 diabetics. They're SOS free, and they've been remarkably successful in helping so many type 1 diabetics lower their insulin dependency, not get off it, because you got to take some insulin. But the bottom line is, usually it is a very successful approach, because remember, one of the big problems with diabetes is insulin resistance that's fostered by high fats and oils in the diet, especially saturated fat. So that SOS approach really is a very profound way to really help insulin function better. And when insulin functions better, we regulate sugar more successfully.
Nice. And let's see. Sherry says, hi, Dr. Frank. I loved my time at Balance for Life last year. Susan wants to know, what does the doctor suggest we do if we get a fever from the virus?
That's a great question. Let me throw the question back on you. What we know is that viruses and bacteria do not do very well, or they tend to fare less well in elevated temperature. And that's why sometimes you'll see, like as we get into the summer, it gets more humid, and that sometimes has to do with the humidity too. You'll see that there'll be a little bit of a downswing sometimes in typical flus and things of this kind. COVID, this SARS-CoV-2 virus, the one associated with COVID-19, is a little bit different in the way it operates that way. But as a rule, bacteria and viruses don't do well in elevated temperature. So the body in its wisdom has evolved the ability over eons of time living in an environment where it's been exposed to bacteria and viruses to know that. It knows that on a cellular level. So what do you think your body does when it's exposed to bacteria and viruses? It elevates temperature. So fever is a very natural, healthy response in the face of infection. And unfortunately, for centuries, the typical approach was to do whatever you could to lower a fever. You know, when I was a kid, if you even had a marginal fever, 99, 100, you were starting to be put on all kinds of little aspirin and different things. And of course, when I was a child, they liked to combine a little religion and science and gave you St. Joseph's aspirin. I love that, St. Joseph's aspirin. If you want to make something benevolent, just put a saint's name in front of any medication. That'll work. And so now many physicians will not even interfere with a fever, even above 103 degrees, because they know it's fighting that infection. Now, understand that that still has to be controlled. So if that fever just keeps escalating, it may outlive its usefulness. But fever in many ways, especially in the early stages, should not be dealt with other than with rest and unbelievable hydration. Because if the body gets dehydrated, that becomes a much more serious circumstance. And truthfully, rest and even marginal fasting, light fasting with hydration will usually allow the body to regulate and control that fever more successfully. But understand the fever is working for you. Let me digress for a second, because this is a really interesting point. You and I have been brought up to fear our own vitality. What do I mean by that? From the earliest moments of our lives, any symptom, headache, fever, pain, we were brought up to see as something that we needed to wage war against, we needed to fight against, when in fact, most of those acute symptoms are the body's attempt at helping you to heal from some input that it's really dealing with. So acute symptoms and acute disease is actually part of a healing process, but we've been brought up to think of it as a primary pathology and problem in itself. So we wage war with all kinds of meds and things to kind of interfere with that action, when in fact, it's the only thing you have going for you. So if you keep suppressing a fever, you will in the long run make the infection significantly worse, or put you in a state that will increase your morbidity and mortality. So it has to be watched. But understand that the fever is a natural protective effect, and it's how your body will fight viral and bacterial infection.
I wonder why they often give you medicine for it then.
There was a time in the 19th century when you had fever, they would close the windows of a room and would take all water away, and people would die with fever and just, dehydration. The biggest key is water and rest and that's why even with this infection, think about it. It has actually a very low mortality, less than 1%. So many times people are getting through the symptoms even of this problem with just things like fever and some coughing and some of those kinds of things, but able to handle it fairly well without major medical intervention or hospitalization. So the body is setting those symptoms up as a way to heal that bacteria. The problem is that when you are a susceptible person and it really attaches and progresses through the lung tissue, and that starts to consolidate with fluid, especially with people with other comorbid conditions like heart disease, lung disease, and the like, then it becomes a major respiratory assault. And that's when people end up on ventilators and respirators and things of that nature. But as a rule, in this particular condition, as in all other infections, these symptoms are generated for the purpose of helping the body heal. And we've been waging war on them with drugs to lower temperatures and all of that. And we pay a price for that. And many of those drugs that lower temperature are things that will cause adverse effects in the kidney, the liver, even things like ibuprofen, Tylenol, all of that. So you have to be very, very careful when you have symptoms that are acute symptoms that are really trying to work in your benefit, and work with them, support them by resting, hydrating, eating more moderately, eating very juicy liquid things. That's when you'll do juices or soups or broths and things of that nature. There you go. Is
Look at
aging
that, just so everybody knows.
right on cue. I couldn't have timed it better. She's my plant.
Well, it's like they say in the book, The Pleasure Trap, feeling better isn't always getting better.
That's right. And sometimes you go to hell and back before you get better. And that's a very real situation because the body has to elaborate the toxicity healing with those underlying conditions, whether it's viral components or bacterial or just toxicity, things from the environment or things that we've taken, or even drugs that we've taken. We now, people that do fast now compared to the old fasting doctors from the 60s and 70s, in some ways we have more complicated situations because the drugs are so much more severe these days. So when we have people coming off of those kinds of pharmaceuticals, the symptoms can even be more profound than they were years ago. So, you see this in the detoxification that goes on.
Susan asks, is there ever a point where a fever gets so high that you would want to take something to lower it?
Well, that's when people were putting people on ice baths or they were lowering it, but that level can be as much as 105 or so. I mean, it can be pretty high. But yes, there is going to be a time where you're going to look at that and you got to evaluate and you look at the whole person and see where they're going. But my contention is that if you do what I said, meaning under total rest, keeping the body warm, keeping it very hydrated, not scaring it, not running it around to a doctor's office, running back and, you know what I'm saying? Many times it will not progress to that. And sometimes it progresses to that because of these other ways that we've tried to deal with it.
Okay, great. Colleen says, I love Dr. Sabatino. He sent me straight that diabetes is looking at fat, not sugar. And the person that asked the question about type 2 diabetes said it was a typo that it's Peggy. She actually has type 2 diabetes, not type 1, that she can't reduce under 130 fasting. I don't know if she means like fasting overnight or if she did a water fast. I can't.
I think she means probably in a fasting glucose or whatever. So I don't know what that person is doing in terms of her lifestyle, but generally speaking, when weight begins to come down and body fat and dietary fat really comes down in the diet, oils and all of that, that should start to come down. But remember this too, this is very important because if you've had insulin resistance for a long time and you've created this condition where the muscle cells are loaded with fat, so sugar can't enter and insulin becomes more resistant, at that point, even eating simple vegetables and fruit, you may get a sugar spike because the body's not quite there yet. So you got to just kind of stay with that. And you've got to be a little more rigorous in your application of the non-SOS approach. And don't forget that exercise is a very important component. Don't forget that sleep is a very important component. People lose sight of the fact that sleep deprivation increases insulin resistance. So it slows down the ability of the body to heal the diabetic condition. And it will promote reactive weight gain. We talked about that on the program that you and I did, that you moderated. So bottom line is there's other factors than just food. Food is primary, but there's other factors that affect all of that. And she needs to address that. And again, that's someone, if she hasn't looked at our program, I recommend that she does. Our Lean for Life program.
I will post
We'll talk about that at the end because I have that on my website now with a link that they can go to.
I just looked it up and I posted the link for that. So that,
good.
I think
and it's also on drfranksabatino.com. Right on the home page, there's a link that takes you to that landing page too.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, this feed just jumps. Oh, here it is. David says or asks, is there a correlation between avoiding a cytokine storm involved in COVID-19 infection and a vegan diet of leafy greens, legumes, whole grains, and fruits?
That's a fantastic question. And the answer is yes. And that's a great question. Generally speaking, when we look at a cytokine cascade, I don't know if everybody knows what that is. Cytokines are chemicals that are basically produced, many of them by the liver, that are kind of like the markers for how the immune system knows where to go in places of inflammation. So they're both involved in the event of inflammation and targeting where the immune system goes. So you've got something like monocytes, colony stimulating, monocyte attractive, chemoattractive protein, MCP. It allows the immune system to know where to go, how the monocytes, the white cells, can target the inflammatory site. So for example, in things like rheumatoid arthritis or autoimmune disease, you get this inflammatory condition with this surge of these cytokine chemicals that are involved in that inflammatory response. And that surge is what's called that cytokine storm or cytokine cascade. So interestingly enough, because the plant-based diet or the plant-exclusive diet is so anti-inflammatory, it tends to down-regulate those cytokines. You don't get that surge, that storm. And also, it also protects the bacteria in the large bowel, keeping your bowel lining more intact so that doesn't break down, allowing proteins to seep into your blood that cause an immune response. A lot of autoimmunity stems from the breakdown in the gut lining, what we call leaky gut. So yes, the non-inflammatory nature of the plant-exclusive diet is profound for keeping the cytokine surge and cascade down. So now think about this. If you have this viral thing that's happening, causing this inflammatory cascade because of the viral infection, how important is it to be eating in a way that's helping you try to reduce that rather than feeding that? So if you were eating dairy products and meat and refined foods, and unfortunately, during this time when people are hunkering down, that's a lot of the stuff that they buy when they go to the grocery stores. They load up on chips and all kinds of crap. I see it when I go. It's amazing to me what people buy. I mean, I'm happy because they leave all the lettuce and cucumbers and everything for me. But the bottom line is they're eating foods that are fundamentally feeding the inflammatory process, even without a viral infection. But now with the viral infection, it becomes even that much more important to keep that viral, that inflammatory situation lower so that when the body tries to fight the virus, it's not going into an exaggerated inflammatory response. We call that mitigation. The body mitigates that response. And the plant-based approach really helps to reduce that cytokine surge so that it doesn't go over the top, because we're finding that the devastation in the lungs in this COVID infection in many ways is almost like an autoimmune response. The body's almost exaggerating its own inflammatory response, leading to devastation in the lung. And I think by keeping these other things down, even moderate intermittent fasting, plant-based approach, it's going to keep that a little bit under a threshold that will not lead to that almost autoimmune-like breakdown of the lung. I hope that's clear to him, what I just said.
Yeah, thank you. You were talking about autoimmune disease a second ago, and Colleen says, can you comment on the hyperimmunity that makes the body attack itself?
Yeah, and this is a really kind of a funky and interesting thing in the human body, because if you think about it, our immune system is designed basically for one thing: to recognize what is us and everything that's not us, what people call self and non-self. And so if you get exposed to a viral infection, your body has to make a spot decision. Is that me? And if that's not me, what do I need to do to protect me against what's not me? That's what the immune system does. Now, you have a couple of kinds of cells in the body, white blood cells called lymphocytes, that are T cells, B cells, different populations of white blood lymphocytes that create this immune response. They promote this immune response. What we now know, for example, is that if in your gut you have trillions of bacteria, in fact, about 10 times more bacteria and organisms than cells of the body. So they exist in that large bowel. And when you eat high fiber plant-based foods, that fiber, you cannot digest that fiber, but your bacteria can. And when you feed that fiber to the bacteria in your gut, it keeps them healthy. And they produce something called short-chain fatty acids, okay? And these short-chain fatty acids will create and feed the gut lining. They make this plush mucus lining that protects all of the cells in your large bowel. And it allows only small things to be absorbed, like water and small electrolytes. But if you have stress with cortisol, or you consume alcohol, or you eat refined foods, there's not enough fiber to feed that bacteria. And that wall, that lining of your large bowel begins to break down. And when it breaks down, it opens up spaces that now much larger molecules can get through. Pieces of protein, fragments of protein. So let's imagine now that you're eating meat products. Let's say you're eating chicken, beef, whatever. And so in that meat, you're going to have proteins in the ligaments, the muscle meat, the cartilage of those animals. If those protein pieces now absorb through the opening of your bowel because it's been damaged and broken open, the immune system's going to start to create an immune response against those foreign proteins. But understand that those foreign proteins in those animal products are very similar to the same proteins in your ligaments, cartilage, and tendons around the joints of the body. So since it's already trying to digest and break down those foreign proteins, what do you think it's going to do when it encounters the same proteins in your own joints? It's going to start eating its way through those. So in many ways, the autoimmune response is an exaggerated response because the immune system has been primed by foreign protein fragments and pieces that have seeped their way, oftentimes through a gut lining that has been compromised because of lifestyle choices that relate to everything from alcohol to stress to refined diets to pesticides, herbicides, and the like. And once that happens, you've got a serious problem because now you have an exaggerated immune response that is attacking your own body. Now, that's actually a changeable thing. And we do that with fasting. We do that with the diet itself. Once you feed that healthy that bacteria the food that it needs, it can start to close that lining, can heal that leaky gut. Fasting can help in that process, reducing inflammation and the cytokine cascade that happens from that. So all of that can be fixed by the lifestyle we're recommending, but it's a very serious problem for people when they have it. And one of the best ways to handle autoimmune disease, I have to be honest with you, is water-only fasting. It is one of the most profound ways to change that.
Yeah, terrific. You don't happen to have a relative watching, do you? Because there's somebody whose last name is Sabatino that's on live.
Maybe.
R-O-D-I-N?
That's my son.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Well,
That's my musician son.
Well, that's good. That's good. So we got family here. Terrific. Okay, because I noticed the last name, so very good. Jamie says, does chiropractic care and/or acupuncture help with Parkinson's disease?
Understand that in Parkinson's disease, you've got a part of the brain that is called the basal ganglia. It's more at the base of the brain. And these are cells that produce dopamine, and they create an effect that, in a sense, smooths out the muscular movements that we do, okay? Because understand that if I have a stimulation to move something like a muscle or to move my hand to pick something up, the movement could get very excited and disjointed. So there's kind of something that has to inhibit certain muscles and actions so that my movement is very smooth. So those nerves in the basal ganglia play a major role in that. But sometimes because of age and damage to the brain, and that can result from any number of things, stress, alcohol, genetics, those neurons, those nerve cells in the basal ganglia become destroyed. And you no longer have that smooth movement. So what do? You see this. You see tremors at rest. You see that kind of situation. So in the early stages of that, sometimes the alternative care, especially things like chiropractic care that may help to establish better neurological balance in the nervous system, help that nervous system in terms of overall function, and possibly other, other kinds of therapeutic modalities like she mentions, they can have an impact. But once you get to that place where those nerves are gone and destroyed, it's very difficult to change that process. That's where people are trying to look at research that does stem cell activation, getting novel cells into those areas that can pick up the slack. But Parkinsonian tremors and things are kind of interesting because there's even been some evidence for people doing cannabinoids, even things with medical marijuana that have slowed down seizure activity, slowed down tremors, and no one quite understands all the reasons why that's happening and what the long-term effect of that is. But it's all centered around the base of the brain and that basal ganglia and those, what we call dopaminergic cells, those cells that have dopamine that affect the muscular smoothing of all movement and motion.
Nice. Andrea says, are you going to offer a replay of Dr. Sabatino's course in the near future? Well, it's not exactly a replay, but you can get the course right now. We've always had
The course is available. It's available.
Yeah, we're just not real pushy salespeople, but the course has always been
At
available.
the end, I'll give you just a little blurb about the course, but not right now. I want to get everybody involved.
But I am posting the link for people that are interested, but I will tell you that Dr. Frank went above and beyond.
AJ and I are very proud of that course. We did a great job with it.
Right, because in addition to what we promised, he over delivered because there were so many questions that he added so much bonus.
We had to add three more complete modules of just Q&A to that.
It really is an unbelievable.
And we kept the price, and we did a good job for everybody.
Yeah, it's a really good course, and since you guys have some time now, and some of you are still struggling with weight, that might be something you want to consider. So Andrea does ask if people with SIBO and IBS have lowered immunity.
The short answer to that is it is a susceptible condition. It doesn't mean that it's actually lowered, because in a way, the immune system is kind of overworking, and you can exhaust that system that way too. But the key to that is, yes, there's going to be challenges that can, again, sap energy from the system, cause innervation, and that's where conditions of rest and maybe even fasting and things of that nature become very important to allow the body to heal that underlying damage. If you've got an irritable bowel and you're getting ongoing inflammation in that system, that's a lot of work that the body's engendering all the time. That's why these folks can feel kind of exhausted. They can feel tired. They can, there's different things that can happen with that. So in my opinion is the kind of food we're recommending. And again, under those conditions, you may have to adjust the diet. You may have to do blended salads. You may be doing more steaming and cooking of food, not as much raw stuff. We make adjustments. All of the doctors that do this work, we have an ideal way that we want people to eat, but you have to understand sometimes under certain conditions of disease, we have to make adjustments. You come to me with ulcerative colitis and I give you a raw diet, you could probably bleed to death. And I don't want that to happen. So we may do blended salads, and we may do lightly steamed stuff and moderate fasting. And, we have ways that we kind of get you back to health if we can.
Great. Heidi wants to know, do I need to increase my plant protein intake because I'm a senior? I eat mostly fruits, veggies, potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squashes with some grains as my starches, and love my food, unable to eat beans, nuts, or seeds.
Well, the question is, how's she doing? I mean, if the energetics are good and she's working out and energy's good and all of that, everything's probably working. You got to look at that. There is this notion that as people get older, they do need a little bit more protein for some of the repair function. So there's always been that discussion. They don't really need a lot more, in my opinion. But I do like the elder person that can handle some legume and some of that plant-based protein. I think it does have value. And if she was not able to do it, I would probably, increase a little bit of those things that center around, whatever it is, a little bit of quinoa, a little bit of potato more, some things like that. But the real key is going to be how's her overall function and performance. If she's able to do her thing and she's feeling pretty good with that, I would say don't rock the boat. I'm a big proponent of if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Nice. Robert Cheek is watching, and he said
Bobby.
Yeah. He said you helped him get off caffeine a couple years ago.
Well, he's a wonderful guy. And Robert Cheek has done so much for the plant-based protein bodybuilders and all the people out there that never thought that you can become a high-performance athlete and bodybuilder on plant-based protein. And Robert has produced a number of books that I highly recommend that show just the opposite and how important it is for overall performance and well-being, and even for the ability to sculpt the kinds of bodies that bodybuilders want with plant-based protein. And it's a great testimony to his work.
Absolutely. We're still getting so many questions about fever. People are asking, at what point do you take medicine? And is it different if it's a child? And what do you think of old-fashioned methods of breaking a fever by using cold towels and ice packs?
Well, look, okay, let's ratchet it back. When you look at children in many ways, they have not been through as much overall, if you will, abuse as adults have. They're kind of new on the planet. Their overall responsiveness many times to things that are a threat to the body can be quite more profound. So generally speaking, you'll see children run higher fevers than adults do, for the reason that the body is very active in trying to get rid of what they do. Look, I raised 5 children, and the best solution for fevers was nursing. I mean, they nursed as much as they wanted. They got that hydration. I can't tell you how important just hydrating, fresh air, and rest is in the face of fever. And I know that sounds so simplistic because we've been led again to believe that we need these yeoman interventions to help the body with these conditions. Trust me, the wisdom of the body has been doing this. No one needs to tell the liver what to do. No one needs to tell the kidney what to do. So the fever has a place. Now, if it gets high, sometimes cooling the body down a little bit had some value. I think most people, if it got above 103, 104, they would be looking to maybe do something to lower it. But I know docs that have not done that. They've just nurtured that, nursed it along, kept that body nice and warm and comfortable. Sometimes the mistake that's made is you start trying to run the child around to a pediatrician's office and you're getting them up and you're getting them innervated. I can't tell you how important absolute rest, hydration, and fresh air is in the face of overall fever. I can't say it any simpler than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Carolyn says, which foods are best for people struggling with ulcerative colitis, and how long and how often would you suggest water fasting?
Well, when you're dealing with ulcerative colitis, it can be very profound because in my experience, I've had them where there's such tremendous blood loss that the hemoglobin levels are so low that they're barely breathing. They're just in a state of absolute weakness. And I have to tell you, there are a couple of cases where I've literally rescued people from what I think would have been an early death just through the fasting process, because what fasting did is with hydration, it allowed, if you think about this, if I have a cut on my arm and I keep doing this, it'll probably heal, but it'll be a lot slower because I keep annoying the tissue. Well, think about this. If you've got a situation where the bowel lining is ulcerated and maybe you're even bleeding, if you're putting food in, that bowel has got peristalsis, it's moving up and down and it's moving. So, the healing part of that gets really slowed down. And sometimes by just fasting the body, you give the entire tract a chance to just effectively heal. So to me, if it was a profound state of ulcerative colitis, I probably wouldn't feed it at all. But what I would follow up with is that I would follow up with things that were more like initially blended salads, things that are a little bit more in a more absorbable digestive state, and then build up, getting more raw things into the diet. I would do a little bit more steamed vegetables, a little softer, so things are not quite as caustic. But I mean, I've had people with ulcerative colitis that have healed on raw food approaches. It's just not something I feel as comfortable doing clinically because there can be pretty profound pathology. And when I see ulcerative colitis, this is also usually very type A personalities too. These are people I've had people on fast that I couldn't get them to even do bed rest with ulcerative colitis. They would kind of they're just over the top with work. And so you've got to really understand that you sometimes need to appreciate that the body needs an absolute resting state to allow things to heal, because now you're directing all the energy of the system to the work of healing and repair. And when you've got anything like an ulcerative colitis and you've got bleeding that could be going on internally, if it got bad enough, there may be the need for an intervention chemically, surgically. It's possible. But I think if you really set it in motion with the fasting process and the proper foods in a more absorbable, less caustic manner, you can get through that.
Okay. Do you know David Himmelstein?
I certainly do, from Baltimore. How you doing, David?
Yeah, well, he wants you to know that he's in the house.
Oh, good for him. I love that. Great.
I'm just wondering, with all the fabulous food at Balance for Life, because I've been there twice, how are you managing if you're not at Balance for Life?
Oh, right now, as of March 31st, Balance for Life closed.
Right. So how are you able to feed yourself is what I'm asking.
Yeah, tell David that I've been doing this long before Balance for Life. Yes, so I know how to cook food and prepare food. And not only that, all my sons, they're all good cooks too. And I always tell people this is one of the best reasons for having children, so they can cook for you later. So they cook a lot of meals for me too. So we load it up like everybody else. We've got beans and potatoes and greens and veggies. And truthfully, shopping has not really been a problem. The stores have been pretty stocked with fresh produce, and I'm very fortunate where I am because we have a Publix, we have the business called Sprout, we have Whole Foods, two of them, we have Trader Joe. I mean, I'm surrounded by, stores that have anything that we would want in terms of produce. So feeding has been easy, actually.
Nice. So let's see what other questions we have here. Do you know anything about irregular menstrual cycles in young girls who are having periods every 2 to 3 months?
The menstrual cycle in women, and young or older, is always affected by so many things because it's affected by emotion, it's affected by trauma and stress, it's affected by sometimes even foods. I can't tell you how many people with irregular cycles come to a program like ours and just eating plant exclusive, their menstrual cycle regulates. It starts getting incredibly regular. So I don't know all of the reasons for the young woman, and it may be that it's just very early in her cycles. And maybe the body's just adjusting and it will regulate itself in a different way as time progresses through her teenage years. But again, that all I can say is just get on a good track with some regular physical activity. Try to regulate the cycles of everything that you're doing, meaning get into normal eating patterns, eat the kind of diet that we're recommending, get into some regular physical activity, try to sleep at similar times, getting a good night's sleep. When you start adjusting the rhythms and cycles and patterns of the body generally, many times in women, the menstrual cycle will follow suit with that. I mean, you can check and see if there's abnormal hormonal things going on in blood work and saliva tests and things of that nature, and maybe there may be a need to do that over time. But barring that, I would do that, and then I would try to regulate the lifestyle a little bit and see where that takes the cycle. And I would be a little more concerned if it was happening more frequently with a lot of bleeding, because then there could be anemia or something else, but it doesn't seem to be the case. But that's something I would check with my OBGYN or whoever she's working with. But check the hormonal levels and then try to normalize the whole overall life cycle.
Nice. Heather asks, what happens in the brain when you get a migraine? I'm perimenopausal and now I get them all the time.
Migraines have a double phase. They have a phase where you have a constriction of blood vessels, usually the vertebral artery coming up off the carotid and all of that, going into the main blood supply, the circle of Willis at the base of the brain. You get a phase where there's a constriction followed by a dilation or dilatation. And so when it dilates, you get a lot of that aura and all of that stuff, and it can be quite pounding. Here's another issue. We find once again that sometimes in the changes, the hormonal changes, she's going through perimenopause now, some of those shifts. Remember, estrogen has a very interesting protective effect on brain tissue. That's why I wrote an article recently. A lot of people don't know that 2 out of 3 people with Alzheimer's are women, not men. It's much more dominant in the female population. There's some people that feel some of that is because of the loss of the protective effect of estrogen as it declines with age. Now, there's studies being done to look at that, so nobody's solid on that yet. But some of that protective effect on the neurological tissue may be estrogenic. But again, I have to tell you that the changes in migraine could be affected by structure. Sometimes we do chiropractic adjusting and it remarkably eliminates migraine incidence. Many times it's chemical and even allergic. There can be sensitivity to a variety of different foods and things that create an effect that causes this vascular change in the brain that goes on. And it can also be major stress patterns and sleep deprivation. So all of those things can feed into the migraine incidence. And again, interestingly enough, when it is of nutritional and digestive origin, this is another case where some periods of fasting can be quite profound. I've eliminated a lot of migraine headache incidents with the fasting process. And I think most of the fasting doctors would tell you the same. They've had those experiences. So I would look at making sure the food is really solid. There are things that we know are triggers for migraine. That's why we know there's an allergic, chocolate, tyramines in red wine, cheeses, hard cheeses. So we know those things can trigger migraine headaches in people. So we know there's a food and allergic component or a food sensitivity component, but there's also structure, stress, sleep. So you need to look at all of that And I would check the I would check the chiropractic care component. You got nothing to lose. Sometimes it can make a huge difference in balancing the neurological system, and it can make a big difference in how the headaches manifest over time.
Yeah, I had my last migraine in 2010, and it wasn't until I gave up chocolate that I gave
There
up.
it is, and that's a noteworthy trigger. Chocolate's very common too.
Yeah, absolutely. Heidi says, thank you for the answer. She'll eat more quinoa and potatoes and wants to know what you think of spirulina.
Well, spirulina, as a supplement, any of these things that involve barley greens, algae, spirulina, they do have nutritional content. The bottom line is, we're recommending such a wide, diverse level of greens on this program, even a little bit of sea greens that can be used in the diet, that a lot of times I don't see the need for a lot of spirulina input, but if you like chlorella or spirulina or whatever, you could add it as a supplemental thing. But truthfully, the way you're eating the wide range of diverse greens we're recommending is really where you want to be. And you don't need to worry about a lot of spirulina. I don't do any of those greens, but I know people that will do smoothies, and you do have like raw reserve. It's a green powder that has spirulinas and barley greens, and people like to add a little bit of that green to their green smoothies. You can do that. I don't have a problem with that. It even has some sea greens in it. So sometimes it's another way to supplement in a more whole food way, because they're whole food supplements rather than pills. They're just ground up greens and things. That's all.
Nice. Lily says, what do you think about corn for people with ulcerative colitis?
Well, corn can be very provocative that way for irritating that lining. You'll notice corn always seems to come out exactly the way it goes in. I never understood the mystery of corn. Corn is really quite a mystery food. No matter how much you chew it, it seems to come out as kernels when you go to the bathroom. Again, corn can be a little bit provocative with hulls and all of that initially, but other things can too. That's why sometimes nuts can be provocative at that time. So the real key is where the level of pathology is and how much healing has gone on. And that's a very important piece. As a rule, corn should not be a major problem. You want it organic when you get it. Corn is one of the most genetically modified and sprayed crops, corn, soy, those kind of things. So you want them as organic as you can, but you have to see if it's affecting you. And if you're getting any irritation or any pain or anything from it, I would just stop it.
Yeah. David wants to know, is Balance for Life just closed for the virus, or it's completely closed? It's the hotel that closed, right?
The hotel closed, and of course our business had to close because nobody was traveling to come to the business. What was the point? So it's supposedly temporarily closed, and then Harold, the owner, has to make a decision when he wants to open again, and we'll go from there. Nobody has a crystal ball right now. We don't know where anything is. We don't know when it's going to be clear for people to travel and to be able to congregate in groups. And, we just don't have that information. So right now we're all on hold.
Right. Listen, I want to respect your time. You've gone an hour. I can go hours with you.
So I'll go a little longer if people want to hang. It's up to them.
Okay, well, but they love you. So,
are there still questions?
Absolutely, guys. Please share this broadcast. Now, as a paisan, as an Italian, I know you're going to love this question from Judith. Is extra virgin olive oil okay to cook with?
Oh God, no. No, and I'm saying that as an Italian man, and I know that's heresy. Here's the thing. In the program that we do, we have recognized that, look, we need a certain amount of oils. There are oils in greens. There are oils in whole foods. We do not recommend oil in any bottled, refined, isolated form, because all you're doing is providing liquid fat to the system. Think about this. If you eat an avocado has a huge fiber content, and people don't realize that. And it's got a beautiful level of fats that it has, different fats, monounsaturated fats, some omega-3 fats, things of that nature. Bottom line is, when you isolate oil from foods that contain oil, all you're doing is concentrating the fat. And we now know that in the processing of plants to oils, you're also exaggerating what's called the AGE content. These are what we call advanced glycation end products. They're involved in promoting inflammation and aging. All high-fat foods have a decent amount of these. So, for example, if you look at olives, there's somewhere in the range of about 1 to 2,000 units of AGEs for about a 3.5-ounce portion. If you take that olive and convert it into olive oil, that 3.5-ounce portion has 5 times the AGE content just in making an oil from it. So we don't want the concentrated fat. Remember, fat is 9 calories per gram compared to 4 for carbohydrates, so it's 2.25 times more calorie dense. And now you're also adding this inflammatory component. So we recommend if you want olives, eat a few olives. Get away from all the brine, get the ones that are as unsalted as you can, and you can use a little bit of olive if you choose to. So we only recommend eating oil in the whole food form. And we go into that in our weight loss program in depth. But the bottom line is I don't recommend it. And I know that's counter to the Mediterranean diet. They want olive oil. And frankly, they would never cook with extra virgin olive oil anyway. They would cook with cooking oil, which is a little more saturated. Extra virgin olive oil people usually reserve for just using as an add-on to salads and things of that nature in an uncooked state, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
I don't recommend.
You don't want to eat it even. You don't want to ingest.
I don't want to eat it in any way, shape, or form. Even the raw olive oil is what I'm telling you raises that AGE content and raises calorie density off the charts. So we're recommending you don't need it. If you're going to put oil, if you're making a salad dressing, we'll put a little dollop of avocado or we'll put a few cashews or walnuts. They have oil. So if you wanted oil, that's how you would do it in modest amounts, but from whole foods.
Good.
And I know all my Italian brethren are turning over in their graves right now.
Frankie, I raised you better. No.
I know. I'm going to pay for them. I know.
What can you do to eliminate fungus in the nails? Severe fungus.
Again, that's a byproduct of immune function, by the way. And so sometimes that is a compromise of immunity. Sometimes those fungus will get into the nail beds. There are some topicals now that people are touting. I haven't seen anything that really works really well, but I would talk to a good podiatrist or someone that's working with those now because they do have some additional ways. They've treated it with lasers. They've treated it with some other topicals. So I have seen it sometimes clear up as the diet cleans and people really fast and do all of that. But sometimes that fungus, once it shows up, can get really entrenched in the nail beds and it's very hard to get at.
Oh boy. Okay, good. Something, we had a dementia question. It just, there we go, from Darius. My mom has never slept well, 88 and in mid-stage dementia. Is there anything we could do nutritionally to stave off dementia?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, there is, because we know dementia is a progressive problem usually. And it starts with, more mild cognitive deficits many times decades before that. Or actually interesting now, we now know that there are brain changes that can occur decades before that do not really show a lot of symptomatology yet. And so people are investigating how early those changes can occur. This is one of those things they talk about, that some of these brain changes are showing up in women perimenopausally when estrogen levels are starting to shift long before there's any symptomatology. So again, nutritionally, we know we don't want toxic things going into the brain like alcohol. We want to keep, remember this, dementia and Alzheimer's is as much a vascular problem as it is a neurological problem. We know now that high cholesterol levels will feed the dementia process. We know that when you're blocking small blood vessels in the brain from fat, from cholesterol, oxygen is not getting into brain tissue. You're beginning the process of brain damage. So we now know that anything that keeps the blood supply to the brain open, so physical activity, intellectual activity, good plant-based foods without animal fats, no refined sugars, alcohol needs to be really cut out. All of those things will keep those small blood vessels in the brain more open and patent so oxygen and blood can get through it. But we now know that it's as much a vascular problem as it is a neurological problem. We also know that the process of the way the body produces homocysteine. Homocysteine is a vascular toxin that comes from the amino acid methionine. And again, when you're eating a lot of high animal-based foods, you can overstimulate the production of homocysteine. works like a vascular toxin. So when I do blood work, I measure homocysteine levels on everybody after the age of 50, because there are some data that suggests when homocysteine levels go up to a certain level, that it may be a precursor to dementia. In her case, the woman's almost 90 years of age with already existing dementia. I don't know how much it's going to change, because in the brain, you get what's called neurofibrillary tangles. And the best way I can describe this, when I was doing my PhD research at Emory Med School many years ago, one of my classmates was getting a PhD in the Alzheimer's brain. So I sat through a lot of talks on Alzheimer's and dementia. And in this situation, think about this. Imagine making spaghetti. And you know how spaghetti, when you make it, it can clump. It can like get all tangled. Well, large parts of the brain get like those clumps of spaghetti over time. And it starts with a cellular process inside the cells where you're getting these tubular tangles that happen, and the brain will actually get kind of tangled so that information can't move through those areas. And so when you have the advanced stage of dementia, there's a lot of that tangling, and it's not a lot of ways to reverse that. Sometimes the brain can be quite redundant, meaning other parts of the brain can pick up the slack and kind of help that communication. But in the advanced stages, it's very difficult. And it's a devastating pathology. It really is.
Absolutely.
It's just hard to watch and hard to be around. And I feel for anybody going through that.
So Debbie says when you were talking about oil, but does that mean coconut oil and other oils
Oh my
too?
God, it means especially coconut oil. Coconut oil is the most saturated of those plant-based oils. In fact, if you want to raise cholesterol levels in the body, coconut oil will do it just about as good as any animal product you can eat. And I know I can hear the wind going out of the sails of my vegan population, because for so long, you were sold this idea of this incredible benefit of coconut oil. And we have a lot of people on plant-based ketogenic diets with a lot of coconut oil. They're blasting their smoothies, their coffee with it. I can't recommend it. You want to eat a little bit of coconut, eat it, but coconut oil is a highly saturated fatty oil, and I don't recommend it.
Okay, very cool. There was a comment here that this man is brilliant, so just thought you might want to hear that. So there's been 3 questions, and again, guys, I apologize if I missed your question. It's nothing personal. This goes really fast, and there's always more questions than.
Yeah, I can't deal with personal health issues because I don't have a history. I don't want to
Right.
I don't want to sell you short. So I'm trying to do more general stuff if we can.
Right. So I've been seeing, and I've seen 3 questions now relating to eye health: macular degeneration, cataracts, and glaucoma.
Again, these are degenerative states. It's interesting that cataracts are seen as in the aging field as a glycation phenomenon. We talked about this idea of advanced glycation end products. I mentioned it with the oils. Well, that first came about when sugar levels got high in the body. It would cross-link protein. And we now know that some of that cross-linking creates these chemicals called advanced glycation end products. Why is that important? Because a lot of the phenomena of aging are things that will show up as this glycation phenomena. So there are people that feel that when you lose the elasticity of collagen in the skin, it's because collagen is being cross-linked by sugar at higher levels. So people that are running a little bit of higher sugar levels, eating more refined sugars over time, get a little bit more of that cross-linking. There's also the feeling that the cross-linking of protein in the lens of the eye can contribute to cataract formation. Glaucoma, sometimes there can be congenital conditions with the narrowing of the angles of the eye where the fluid is retained, or it could be because of diet where you're retaining fluid or eating higher sodium levels where you're pushing more fluid into the eye area. And macular degeneration can occur with trauma, stress, and age over time, even genetically. There are people that try to stem that with specific things, increasing antioxidants in the diet and even supplements of bearberry and other things. Bottom line is, when that's happening, it's a very difficult thing to shift and change, in my opinion. But there are some alternative approaches that people have tried with supplementation that, again, I don't see long, big studies about it, but they can pursue some of that, and some of that is out there. I can't highly recommend it, but I know that there are people that work with some of that.
Nice. Well, since you talked about oil, Joy wants to know how you feel about bread.
Well, look, again, when we look and we talk about the calorie density of foods, we know that when you're eating fresh fruits and vegetables and even whole grains and potatoes, you're kind of staying under this notion of about 600 to 700 calories per pound. Fruits and veggies are like 1 to 3. And so you're under that 600 to 700. So that keeps you at a very low calorie density. If you take a whole grain like rice or wheat or millet, and now you grind it into flour, and now you make bread from it, you're kind of getting away from the food chain, you will increase the calorie density by pound almost 3 to 4 fold. So it becomes that much more calorie dense. So could you eat bread? You could, but I would urge you, if you do, you better make it as much of a whole complete bread as you can, like an Ezekiel bread or a sprouted grain bread, but you better watch quantity, because if your goal is to keep weight under control or to really regulate that, you're now moving into a much more higher calorie dense thing. And listen, I had a bread thing. I got a bread thing. I know all of you out there, we can go to Breads Anonymous. I'm with you. I grew up in an Italian household. When I was born, I came out with a piece of bread in one hand, glass of wine in the other. I came out on a full moon on a Saturday night ready to party, and nothing has changed since. I got a bread thing. So with me, if I want a piece, I like the hard breads, because I notice if you give me a soft loaf of bread, like a good vegan bread that's soft, I can eat a whole loaf. But you get those hard breads, and many times just a slice will do you. And so if you got a bread thing and you got to kind of get through that, that would be a way to do it. But I would still have it with big salads and big greens and, all of that. But just understand that breads have higher calorie density, and many of the breads are made with all kinds of emulsifiers, fillers. And so make sure, if you do it, don't sell yourself short. Get something that's really highest quality that you can find.
And definitely don't dip it in olive oil.
And don't dip it in olive oil. No.
Mike asks about, is it tinnitus or tinnitus?
Tinnitus, that's fine. Some people say tinnitus. So ringing in the ears. Well, look, that's another issue where, again, there has been some work with biofeedback that has helped that. There has been some work, sometimes even, again, with chiropractic care affecting the nerve supply to that. But there's a lot that's unknown about that ringing. And for some people, it can be seriously over the top, abusive and annoying. So I know how compromising that can be. I would make sure and have a good, thorough ear exam, make sure the conduction changes are good, make sure you're not dealing with nerve damage, make sure there's no other frank pathology related to that. But there has been some interesting data on biofeedback techniques helping people with that in Canada, especially. So you can look that up. But again, I would work making sure the other aspects of your lifestyle are pretty much in balance. And then see, I always find that to be the best starting point, because no matter what's going on in your body, many times by finding that balance of, with food and activity and stress management and so on, you'll be surprised how symptoms can shift a little bit. So make sure you're doing some good, stress reduction work if you can, helping yourself deal more effectively with the stressful things we all have to handle. But then check it and make sure the ear itself is functioning well.
Great, thank you. Judith, who asked about oil, is now asking if peanut butter is acceptable. We know how Dr. Goldhammer would answer that.
No, it's not. Well, look, again. First of all, peanut butter is not a clean nut butter. If you're going to do nut butter, there's better nut butters. But again, remember, nuts are incredibly calorie dense. And in the butter form, you can so overeat on calorie density with nut butters. But making a fresh nut butter, an almond butter or whatever, a small amount could be used. I just don't find peanut butter has a lot of sometimes chemical compromise to it. It's not the cleanest of the nut butters. Many of the peanut butters have even added oils and sugars. My advice with nut butters, if you're going to do them, you've got to do them completely raw with nothing but the nut and small amounts. Because as you and I know, I can take out a jar of nut butter, and nut butters always seem to taste better right around midnight when your eyes rolling back in your head and you're like, a teaspoon to a tablespoon of nut butter would be an entire portion for a day. Understand that. So, we're looking at a very small amount.
And you can't even swipe a piece of bread, which you shouldn't be eating anyway.
You can't even do the old schmear and you're in trouble already. You know what I mean? Even a schmear.
That's hilarious. Taylor asks, is a small amount of animal products all right? I'm an ex-vegan. I have gut issues.
Wait, tell me again. I missed the beginning of the question.
Is a small amount of animal products all right? I'm an ex-vegan. I have gut issues.
Okay. When we look at the long-lived cultures on this planet, there are many of them that are eating, honestly, a small, very small amount of animal product. I don't condone it in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, if you've got gut issues, I can't see where there's any value in eating any animal product whatsoever, because we know that even cooked vegetable products, and there are enough analog products that are not perfect that I still would eat before I would eat any animal product. So for me, they're all unacceptable. But again, I also appreciate that not everybody listening may be completely vegan, and I don't expect that everyone listening is going to immediately sprout wings and fly out of this interview as an army of saintly vegans. Though I like that image a lot, by the way, and I could see the wings sprouting in this room as we speak. But my advice would be, if you're going to eat animal product, here's what I recommend. Take your hand, close the fingers. You see the part of my palm that's still exposed? That's the amount you would eat in a week, if you're going to do that. And I don't really condone that, but at least that would be consistent with long-lived blue zone cultures that are mostly plant-based that still have a little bit of animal protein. I just can't condone it, though. There's too many issues with it, and especially even in light of what we're looking at now with viral infection. Again, I need to emphasize, most human viruses are coming from animal sources. And if we get away from really starting to futz around with the killing and deplorable conditions of animals on this planet, we would not have that problem. Okay?
Yeah. I don't want to keep you forever. I mean, I could, but maybe one day we could talk about, because Taylor brings up an interesting topic about people that are ex-vegans. I read about them, and it's never just like your next door neighbor. It's always somebody that had a big YouTube channel, that was a blogger, that it didn't work. We can't address this just in the few minutes we have left.
There are a lot of issues for why people are unsuccessful in any program. You understand what I'm saying? And I think what happens is sometimes the person that was the vegan, that now is not the vegan, they feel compelled to highlight the inability of anyone to be vegan because they were not able to do it. And it's a huge mistake. You've been doing it a long time. I've been doing it between 40 and 45 years. I mean, the issue of it is, how do you find that balance in your life with the food you're eating? And how do you create the diversity of the food you're eating to support life at the highest level for you? And I find that sometimes people will go in, they'll have a little turning point, they'll have a stress pattern. Maybe they eat something, they have a little problem with it. Then they feel like, oh my God, I got to go back and eat a little bit more of this. Then they do that, and the symptom seems to be a little bit different. So that gives them a justification for making the change. What I need to do is, when I deal with that, I got to try to understand what led to that. The truth of the matter is, there are thousands and thousands of people that have been vegan over 20, 30, and 40 years of their lives. So we know that it's doable. We know that it sustains life at the highest level. I tell people, the last time I saw a doctor was 55 years ago. You know what I'm saying? And there's not been a medication or a medical treatment in all that time. I raised 5 children. As children, never had a pediatrician visit with those foods. So the bottom line here is, yes, it is an issue because it comes up, and then it always is that person that has 40 million followers on YouTube that decides now they're going to tell people why they can't be vegan. I think it's something shabby to do, because it really only speaks to the inability of that person to not understand the conditions of their own life that led to that, rather than trying to gather a choir now that agrees with them that you can't be vegan. I think that's a mistake.
Thank you. Listen, I can't keep you more than 90 minutes. That's not fair. Maybe you'll just come back next week, because I can say.
I'll be happy to do that. I'll be happy. Look, what am I doing right now? I'm sitting home.
And we could have the Dr. Frank show.
I'm working on writing and research and all. So I'd love to do that. Let me mention 3 things. If I can.
Wait. I should say one thing first. and yes, and then you can say whatever you want for as long as you want. I happen to have an opening next Saturday at 2 because I'm trying to go live every day, at least once a day. And what I'll do is I'll write down the questions that we didn't get to. I'll save these, whether the people can watch or not. You know what I'm saying? And,
Okay.
and please say anything you want.
Okay. What I want to mention 3 things. Number 1, I want to mention our course, because I think we did that because there's a lot of people suffering with obesity. And we know that even right now, people that have weight issues are 6 times more prone to have complications even from viral infection. So we did that Lean for Life program on drfranksabatino.com. On that homepage, there's a link to being able to get that course. So that's all you need to do. Go to drfranksabatino.com. And it takes you right to the beautiful landing page that Toby created, that we created for that course. And you can pick that up. And it's a 13-module program that covers the full panorama. I want to mention one other thing. We were going to have this conference of the NHA this year, and this is an organization that's close to my heart. And because they're not having that, that puts them at a compromise for their own survival. So I'm urging people to go to healthscience.org, check the organization out, the National Health Association. For $35 a year, they do one of the best things on health education. They put out a magazine called Health Science. I'm one of their featured writers. Dr. Esser is one of their writers. Dr. Goldhammer is one of their writers. The best people give their energy and time to this organization, and I recommend it. And the third thing is that I don't know of any book on survival in pandemic flus better than Janie Goddard, Jayney Goddard. She wrote a remarkable book on survival flu pandemics and all of the natural alternative stuff that we're talking about, and also the stuff on aging, especially for women, in her book called Rewind Your Body Clock. So those 3 things I highly recommend. And again, she's Janie Goddard, Goddard.
Why don't I just interview Janie Goddard and she can talk about the book?
And she could do that. She can talk about her work, but that'd be fine.
Yeah. So why don't you
I'm mentioning it because there's so many things came up about aging and women, and she also has her story on recovering from autoimmune disease. So it's a great story. So I recommend, or at least I'm talking about those 3 things right now. That's all I want to mention. But again, I really want to highlight that National Health Association, and I please help them out. They do nothing but sell information. There's no products. There's nothing. They're an amazing group. Mark Huberman, Wanda Huberman. They've been in business. They're the oldest vegan and vegetarian organization, 70 years old. I've been connected with them for 40 years, and I recommend them highly. Okay?
Well, if it wasn't for that magazine, I probably would never have connected with you. Because
you wouldn't have read my article on addiction, and we wouldn't have even talked.
Right. Well, everybody wants you back. And so if you're available, we'll have you back. And
that article was like Match.com for me and AJ. We matched right after that.
That's right. It's because I'm an Aries, you're a Libra. It's like we're just like perfect together. Absolutely. Well, we could just.
I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I want to thank everybody that tuned in and stayed all this time with us. And I'm happy to come back and play with you guys anytime you want.
That's great. And guys, please make sure that if you're not subscribed to me on YouTube, that sign up for my mailing list, because I try to give you the schedule in advance when I can, because today was just like a stellar day with both Dr. Esser and then Dr. Sabatino. We had more people watching today than ever. And I don't know if it's because we sent it out to the mailing list or maybe people are free on Sunday, but please consider sharing these broadcasts.
And you're going to make these talks available again, right? They're going to be recorded?
Immediately. So the way it works, Dr. Frank, is this is airing live right now on both YouTube and Facebook, but the minute it's over, it will stay on YouTube for.
Oh, that's great. Good.
Yeah. So, perfect. Okay. So can we have those 3 links again, Chef AJ? What I'm going to have to do, Nadej, is get them from Dr. Frank and actually put them in the show notes. Okay,
that'll be great.
Right, because if I type it in here, it doesn't stay forever. So according to your schedule, we'll have you back. We'll have Jamie back. And thank you guys so much for watching. Tomorrow, I probably have 2 interviews again. I know that at noon Pacific time, I have a wonderful gastroenterologist, plant-based, and his name is Dr. Alan Desmond, and I may have a surprise guest at 5 who's well-known. I don't want to announce it because he hasn't confirmed. So thanks so much. It's always great talking to you, Dr. Frank, and I hope to see you back soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Be well. Stay well.
Yeah, and don't forget, please, to check out Dr. Frank's course, especially if you are struggling with weight or food addictions. Thanks again, Frank. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Be well.